Welcome. I'm Sister Who. Today I just wanted to offer a few comments, a few reflections, if you will, on the subject of truth, which is a subject that's been debated and described for thousands of years. So I don't imagine we're going to answer anything, especially within the next half hour here on the show, but perhaps we can provide a little food for thought that might be helpful to you. I'm rather fond of the biblical verse that says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Because it does seem again and again that that which is truth has this effect of somehow empowering and liberating in our lives. Even if it's the truth of a negative circumstance, it gives us a clearer picture of what it is we're dealing with and what we might do in response to that. It moves us to a firmer ground, if you will, to stand on, from which to take our next step. The thing I noticed in my ponderings of truth is that it's contextual. What's true for one person isn't necessarily true for another. And that tells me that the truth somehow comes from that context, that it's true because of this or that circumstance or characteristic. In that sense, truth is something we discover. It's, in my opinion, not so much something we create as that we discover. So that when we're searching for truth, we might, for example, look at the circumstances and then look at what is happening within those circumstances because of the characteristics of those circumstances. When we initially come to a situation, though, we don't necessarily know what the circumstances are or what effect it's having. If you looked at a picture of a room, for example, it might look like a perfectly nice place to be until someone informed you that the whole room had been sealed and all the air had been pumped out, and there was a vacuum in there so that there wasn't enough oxygen to keep a person alive for more than 30 seconds. It would look the same, but there would be an invisible truth that would make the life of a human being within that context difficult, if not impossible. And you might look at another photo of a different room that would look exactly the same, but from which the air had not been pumped out, and it would be a perfectly safe place for people to be. Because the thing that creates the truth of danger or safety in that circumstance is not something that can be measured by our physical eyes, something that's visible. It's something that needs to be measured in other ways. At one time, the difference, I guess, between personal truth and societal truth. For individuals discovering circumstances, they might find certain things to be true. For myself, discovering the fact that I was a gay man, it was a question of looking in the mirror and pondering and reflecting on what was going through my mind and my heart and what made sense to me and how everything worked for me in this relational sense, and finding that when I accepted an orientation of being gay as being true for me, a whole lot of other things made sense. And I was able to relate to life in a much more constructive, much better way, able to relate to myself in a much better way. There are a lot of different things, though, way beyond orientation, though, that come down to the area of personal truth. Personal truth could even be whether someone is right or left-handed. At one time, society, in many places around the world, but especially in the United States, had a belief that there was something wrong with being left-handed, that everyone should be right-handed. So in terms of which hand they write their name with, which hand they do most activities with. Children who discovered that they were left-handed never made a choice to be left-handed. They just discovered that's what worked for them. It had something to do with the way the brain was shaped, I guess. They discovered that, but at one time, such children would be punished, reprimanded, coerced, whatever they could do to try to make them into right-handed people. And for some of these children, it created a lot of psychological and emotional problems because they were not allowed to be who and what they were. in whatever way they found most effective. It was a discovery that I'm left-handed. I didn't choose to be left-handed. In my case, I think I'm right-handed, but I tend to be ambidextrous sometimes. So where I can sign my name with either hand, but of course it looks completely different depending on which hand I use. In trying to, that's the personal level of discovery that frequently comes through reflection, through looking in the mirror, through keeping a journal to see how I behave in these sorts of circumstances. What is true for me within these circumstances? When I go into this circumstance, do I feel what everyone else says they feel? And if the truth is, I don't feel that way, then that's something I need to address in a constructive fashion rather than trying to censor myself, trying to hide the fact that I'm different or something. Because I think the differences and uniquenesses that are within each person were put there by God or the universe or whatever higher power you want to describe. The fact that they're there, to me, says that there is some way in which they're intended to be good, that there's some way in which that characteristic can contribute to life, that there are things that left-handed people will be able to do or say, or ways that they have of dealing with life that could be somehow instructive if we gave it a little more thought and paid attention to what that circumstance was trying to tell us, or some of the things that circumstance could tell us. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. When we get to the societal level, though, because we're now trying to come up with truth that applies to many people, that could be applied to an entire town all at once. One truth, for example, may be everyone needs a mailing address. That in order to send and receive communication, in order to get notices from the government, in order to get items shipped to you that you might order by telephone or using your computer over the internet, there has to be an address through which the world can locate you and communicate with you and interact with you. And so, okay, if everyone needs an address, then we'll need a mail system, some group of people who are responsible for collecting the mail at one place and delivering it at another place. People who are responsible for picking up the packages and bringing them to your house and delivering them. Sometimes there are separate package companies, sometimes there's the United States Postal Service but in virtually every country around the world, there's some equivalent of people who are professionally engaged in shifting messages and items from one place to another. So there's some sort of basic truth there, but it fluctuates quite a bit from one individual to the next. One person may have the mail delivered through a slot on their front door. Another person may have a mailbox by the end of the driveway. A third person might have to go to the post office with a key and get a post office box at the post office. Depending on what sort of delivery options are available. In some of your more remote areas of, northern Canada or Alaska, there may be things that are delivered by airplane, that are flown into areas because of how remote they are and how much distance has to be crossed. The problem with that, of course, is the expense of flying, of making that happen, would, in some instances, correspond to a higher cost for getting that message delivered because someone has to pay the fuel for the airplane. So I guess it comes down to that question of how important is communication. But no society can function without communication, because as soon as you have two people, you're at the beginning of creating a society, because you suddenly have two different ways of looking at things. And what we form in society, the truth we create collectively, is our agreements about how things are, what they mean, what we should do with them or about them. Every single traffic light anywhere in the country is an example, a symbol, if you will, of societal agreements to conduct our lives in a relatively harmonious fashion. That when the light turns red, that means I stop and you get to go. and when the light turns green for me, that I get to go and you have to wait. And collectively, the majority of us have agreed that this is a good way to harmonize our actions. And so the truth of our society is that the world is a shared space, first of all. That applies to so many things. The world is a shared space. It's not only here for just one of us or just a small group of us to where we can tell everyone else they have to cater or adapt to us. There needs to be a sense of mutual respect and an egalitarian society, some equality. Kind of the old maxim that we all take turns. Whose turn is it this time? The truth of a particular moment may be that it is his turn, not yours, or that it is your turn and not hers. Any number of things like that. But further on that level of society, though, one of the places humanity would typically look for truth is some sort of general publication. In times before the printing press, there might actually be a person called the town crier who would go around crying out the news so that everybody could hear it. There will be a meeting at such and such location tomorrow at 2 o'clock or tomorrow at high noon. A different army is invading and marching toward us, or a battle was won someplace, or the king and queen have had the queen has delivered a new child, so that now there is a prince or a princess about which to be concerned, or the king has died and the prince is now tomorrow we're going to have a ritual where the prince is made the new king because the old king has died. All sorts of news that the people needed to know in order to keep their society functioning. If there was a famine or something interfered with the food supply, people would need to know that sort of thing. All of the people, not just one or two individuals. And so the town crier would go around and let people know the truth, as well as they could determine it, of the situation that might affect their lives. That the people in the next town over had experienced an earthquake, and so should we all go help them rebuild, because someday, if it ever happens to us, we'll want them to come help us. The truth of relationship in that example would be that there is a mutual belief in an exchange, that each side believes in helping the other when misfortune is experienced, because misfortune has a random way of picking on this person or that person. And no matter how careful someone is, eating the right things, building the best house, everything you could imagine, still they could wake up one morning and find themselves diagnosed with lung cancer, or any number of other things. They could do a simple gesture they've done every day for the last 20 years, going to the well in the village square for a bucket of water, in earlier times. And today, however, there's a problem. The well is just about dry because no rain has fallen in the last 2 months. That's another truth with which to deal, but it's a shifting context, because what's true today may not be true tomorrow. It may be true today that the well is dry because we haven't had any rain, but if it rains tomorrow, then the well will no longer be dry, and there will hopefully be enough water in there to meet all the needs. And so truth changes according to its context. It's very contextual. There is truth. To say that there is no truth, we can't know truth, to me just seems like the lazy man's way out of not responding to the circumstances and challenges that arise, of not developing himself or herself toward greater ability. That the truth may be that I don't feel like building my house. I'm interested in other things. I would rather go fishing, and I'd rather go watch a beautiful sunset, whatever. The problem, of course, comes, especially for those living in northern climates, when you get to the end of the summer and the weather starts to turn cold. If you don't have a house to keep the heat in and the rain and snow out, it will be much more difficult to survive the winter. And so truth is one of those dynamics that you find virtually everywhere in the world that ideally guides us toward not only a greater chance of survival, but a greater quality of life. If the truth of a neighborhood, for example, is that the person who lives next door has a particular resource or a particular skill, the truth that comes out of that is that if you are able to maintain a good relationship with that person, their resources they don't become your own, but they may be available to you. And in the similar sort of way, if you can get them to value you enough to share the resources, the corresponding flip side of that is you valuing them enough that when they're in trouble, you share your resources. In farming and agrarian communities in the past, if there was not a official fire department in a particular small town, if someone's house caught on fire, everyone would grab whatever buckets they had, and they would all come running, and they'd form what they called a bucket brigade, where they're passing buckets of water trying to put out the fire. And everybody, without concern of, I don't have the time, or are they going to pay me, none of that was an issue. It was about, I'm here for you because I need you to be there for me. The truth is that we're interdependent, that there is some sense in which I'm dependent upon you and some sense in which you're dependent upon me. Biologists will tell us that in any ecosystem, and the ecological system of plants and animals and people sharing the same living space, that the fewer number of species you have, the more likely it is for those species to dwindle to the point of extinction. And the more abundance of species, the more different kinds you have, the more likely it is that through each thing contributing something different to the mix, that they will all be able to survive. It's an easy thing to forget in our modern times of wanting to believe in how independent we could be, because we don't see the other part of the exchange in many cases. A person who receives a check for a stock investment, for example, doesn't see that that check only happens because the company is being financially successful. And the company is only being financially successful because they're of workers and managers who have committed themselves to doing the best possible job on behalf of the company. And they are only successful because there are customers who have the resources necessary to purchase or hire those services and goods. You can't make $1 million selling pencils if nobody will buy the pencils. You're dependent upon all the customers who buy the pencils or whatever product it is you're selling. But this is where it's a complex truth that seeing how interconnected everything is, that's a characteristic. That's not the goal. That's not what's most important. It's not most important that everything is interconnected. What's most important is the life that is created by embracing that interconnection in the best possible way. This is where our various systems come in, and we have to be honest and embrace the truth of our systems, because systems also, like truth, are very contextual. In order for a system to work, certain circumstances have to be there, and if they're not, then the system won't work well. And of course, any system could be abused also. Again, if the circumstances or qualities that would make for an effective, enduring system are not available, then the system will more likely become oppressive. Capitalism, just as one example among many, is an economic system that has to do with capitalizing on money and has to do with how much money people have. but it's a system that's intended to support a society. The goal is not the survival of the system. And at whatever point capitalism no longer serves us, we as human beings need to be able to change the system to something that does meet the need. If we reverse the whole equation and create a world in which humans exist to serve capitalism, capitalism will wind up consuming the humans, because it wasn't intended to have that kind of relationship. People will be working for a living and pouring their lives into something until they die. And the characteristic of capitalism that makes this oppressive is that it has no way of saying what's enough, because it's kind of like saying how much circulation of the blood in your body is enough. Well, it has to be constant, and if it ever stops, you will die. In a similar sort of way, capitalism is like the circulation of blood in a society. It has to be constantly circulating in order to keep the body of society or the community going and to keep it healthy. Anytime it stops, some sort of problem sets in, just like having a blood clot in your body. Imagine, if you will, this is a really oversimplified metaphor, but imagine, if you will, a circle of 100 people all standing next to each other in a big circle, and they each have $1 in their hands. And at some prearranged signal, whatever, everyone starts passing their dollar to the person on the left, always to the next person. Well, as long as they all keep passing the dollar, everybody will have $1 and all the needs will be met. If anyone around the circle, however, gets greedy and wants more than $1, or gets fearful, perhaps, and worries that, well, what if somebody else doesn't give me his dollar? Then I won't have any, and that will be terrible. So maybe I should hold back $1 as put it in a savings account as a reserve, keep it off to the side, so that if anybody ever doesn't give me his dollar, then I'll still have one. Well, you'll still have one, but you'll still have to spend it to get what you need. Because by nature, the money has to keep circulating. You have to be able to buy the food, buy the services, buy whatever you need. Because there's a certain minimum of food, clothing, and shelter that everyone needs to survive. And so really you can't ensure your own survival unless you're equally committed to the survival of everyone else in the circle. Because if anything bad happens to someone in the circle gets smaller, there's fewer people to shoulder the struggles of surviving. If the circle gets too small, and it's only you and one or two other people, if your house catches fire, the three of you are going to have to put out the fire all by yourselves. If you have a larger community of people, there will be, as they say, many hands light work. There will be enough people to address the circumstance that it can be effectively addressed. Problem we're dealing with in this day and age, and I suspect for a long time to come, because I think it's going to be a long time before we figure out some way of balancing, because there's so much disagreement on this, but that is the whole thing of overpopulation. When you simply have so many people that we don't know each other by name or face anymore. And the truth of living in a world that is overpopulated becomes a really difficult thing to wrestle with. And finding that at that point, on an individual level, we can still make a difference in the lives of certain other individuals. On a societal level, we start getting into sticky things like who's important and who's not to society at the present time. Because 50 years from now, society will value something else, and everything will change again. If we remain supportive of each other, if we love each other, if we stand together, we will get through any difficulty that comes along, I'm confident. It reminds me of the one line I remember from the movie Gladiator, which I found to be a very violent movie, but it made so much sense. There was a particular circumstance in which a Roman military officer wound up being thrown in with various criminals and other people rejected and devalued by society who are going to be sent out into this big arena to do battle for the entertainment of wealthier people, which I find to be pretty sick entertainment, but for their entertainment they wanted all of the people that society devalued to come out and fight for their lives against lions and all sorts of dangerous animals, against all sorts of adversaries. And this, the gladiator, this particular man who had military training in the Roman military, expressed to all of them as they were being sent out in the arena, if we fight together, we live. If we fight individually, we die. And that applies to so many things. If we truly live like everyone matters, and if we try to do it together, and if we share the resources and are concerned about everyone having legitimate ways to get their needs met, we will all make it through any difficult time that ever comes along. And if we attempt to go it alone, to hoard our resources, to withhold, to clench tightly whatever wealth or ability comes within reach, ultimately clenching our fists that tightly, we will wind up strangling ourselves, and we will die. That's where we come back to the pervasive, wonderful final truth of love. That love is what makes all the good things possible. And if we take truth, and if we take love, we will have ability, we will have life, we will have a reason for living. We will have a reason to keep pressing on, even when perhaps it doesn't make any sense because we don't have the full truth of the matter yet. Anyway, I hope this has been a fruitful time of considering these ideas with me. Thank you for watching.